Encyclopedia Brown Solves Them All by Donald J. Sobel. The Case of the Wagon Master. Shh, whispered Sally. I think we are about to be attacked. Encyclopedia listened. He heard a faint rustle of leaves outside the Brown Detective Agency, but he could see no one. It must be Joe Cooper, he said quietly. For a long time nothing happened. Then a voice barked, "Bang, bang!" From behind the bush jumped a boy dressed like Daniel Boone. He wore a suit of buckskin, a coonskin cap, and moccasins with colored beads. He was aiming a rusty old rifle at the detectives. "Joe Cooper," scolded Sally, "you shouldn't go around scaring people like that." "I'm on the warpath," announced Joe. Joe came from one of Idawal's oldest families. The Coopers had settled in the area when it was still overrun by palmetto palms and Indians. Whenever Joe felt mad at anybody, he went on the warpath. He dressed up like a frontiersman and pretended to shoot his enemy. It made him feel better. "I could have filled you both with holes," he said proudly. Encyclopedia knew Joe's rifle was so old and rusted it couldn't shoot gumdrops. "I'm glad you missed," he said, playing along. "I missed you on purpose," said Joe. "It's not you I'm mad at today. It's Buck Calhoun." "Holy cats!" exclaimed Encyclopedia. "Buck Calhoun has been dead for 100 years. You can't shoot him." "Of course not. What do you think is making me so mad?" shouted Joe. Then in a calmer voice he said, "Did you see the story about him in the newspaper this morning?" Encyclopedia nodded. The newspaper reported that a statue of Buck Calhoun had been unveiled at Fort Hope. The statue honored Buck's quick thinking in saving a wagon train in 1872. "They've made a hero out of that bird-brained phony," said Joe. "Why, he was too stupid to stay with the army as an Indian scout. He led the 4th Cavalry into so many ambushes the troopers figured he was half redskin and half blind." Joe slapped 25 cents on the gasoline can. "I want to hire you," he said. "My great-grandfather was wounded because of Buck Calhoun, and he had to retire from the army. Prove Buck wasn't a hero. Then they will have to tear down the statue of him." "We can only do our best," said Encyclopedia carefully. After the terrible temper Joe had left, Sally questioned Encyclopedia. "Do you think we should have taken his money?" she asked. "This isn't an ordinary case. Where do we begin?" "At Fort Hope," said Encyclopedia. "Let's go." Fort Hope stood 11 miles west of Idawal. The fort had been entirely rebuilt so that it looked exactly as it had looked in 1872. As Encyclopedia and Sally got off the bus, they saw that the 3 o'clock tour of the fort was underway. A man in a black cap was guiding a small group of people to the many points of interest. "Just in time," said Encyclopedia. The guide had stopped at the statue of Buck Calhoun. The detectives joined the group and listened to the tale of the desperate midnight in July 1872. "Buck Calhoun was a scout for the 4th Cavalry before he became a famous wagon train master," began the guide. "Early in July the Seminoles put on the war paint. Calhoun knew they were burning and scalping, and when he came through that mountain pass, he took a long, hard look at Fort Hope." The guide turned and pointed to the mountain pass, which was now Emerson Avenue. "Despite a light rain, Calhoun had a good view of the fort from up in the pass," went on the guide. "The American flag was flying proudly and soldiers manned the walls. Everything looked all right. The guide paused to allow the group to get the feeling of danger. Then he resumed. Calhoun was wagon train master for 500 settlers. Having studied the fort from the distance, he decided it was safe to move from the pass. So shortly after midnight he started down. Only he didn't know the truth. The redskins had slain everyone inside the fort. What Calhoun saw were Indians dressed up in the uniforms of the dead soldiers. A woman in the group let out a shriek of horror. The guide gave her a comforting look and went on. When the settlers got onto the open ground, the Indians poured out of the fort, hollering and whooping and shooting. Half the settlers were killed right off. The rest seemed doomed. But Calhoun stayed cool and did some fancy thinking. He closed up the big Conestoga wagons into columns of twos and raced for the fort's open gates. A hush fell upon the group. No one moved. Everyone waited to hear the outcome of Buck Calhoun's heroic charge of the gates. Just as Calhoun figured, said the guide. There wasn't enough room going through the gates for the skinniest Indian to sneak in alongside the big wagons. Suddenly all the settlers were inside the fort, and when Calhoun slammed the gates shut, all the Indians were outside. His courage, coolness, and quick thinking had saved half the settlers. You mean, spoke up Encyclopedia, his stupidity killed half the settlers. He never should have let the wagon train down from the pass. Why not? Solution to the case of the wagon master. After capturing Fort Hope, the Indians left the American flag flying. They did not know there were rules for displaying it. But Buck Calhoun had been a scout for the 4th Cavalry. He should have known how to honor the flag. Before coming down from the pass, he saw the flag flying. He thought this meant that everything was all right at the fort. He had never learned that the flag is not flown after sunset under normal conditions or in the rain. That it was flying in the rain at midnight should have instantly warned him that something was wrong at the fort. P.S. The statue of Buck Calhoun was taken away.